Once more into the breach, dear friends. Can never remember whether it's unto or into. And could you put the light up a little bit, please? And can you hear me? Is that maximum? That's good. Okay. And congratulations on not going to the beach this afternoon. Zadie Smith, and I saw this comment just after I'd finished writing the lecture and thought it seemed an extraordinarily perceptive comment on her part about what difficulty she had in writing this book, White Teeth. How to present, she said, a working class experience to the middle class without diluting it. How to stay angry without letting anger distort your work. How to be funny about serious matters. And I hope you find at least some of her work entertaining. I find it wildly funny at times, especially the opening scene in the book, which of course is when he's trying to commit suicide. White Teeth, published in the first year of the 21st century, covers a broad sweep of 20th century history. From the legendary Jamaican earthquake of 1907, well, they say it's legendary, I must confess I hadn't actually heard of the earthquake until then, in which the mother of one of the main protagonists, Clara Bowden, is born, and one small sector of World War II, in which two of the main protagonists, Archie Jones, the Englishman, and Samad Iqbal, the Bengali, meet. To the marriage and birth of their three children, Irie Jones, Magad, and Millet Iqbal's childhood in 1980s London. And the last day of 1992, when all the characters meet up, rather conveniently, at a lecture given on the future of genetics. With a final flash forward, very conveniently, to the 31st of December 1999, thus more or less trying to cover the whole of the 20th century. On the way, Zadie Smith brings in other historical events, such as the assassination of Indira Gandhi, which of course matters to the Bengali and Indian characters in the book, in 1984, the burning of Salman Rushdie's satanic verses, I don't know whether that reached you here, by British Muslims in 1989, that is the basis of one of the incidents in the book, the fall of the Berlin Wall, which of course we all know about, don't we, at the end of 1989, and the British hurricane of 1987, which incidentally came into the rings of Saturn, if you read it last year, when it was a very strange and shocking incident for British people to wake up and see all those lovely trees flat. But if this novel continues to be read in years to come, it will not be for its portrayal of World War II, nor of Jamaica at the turn of the 20th century, but for its representation of the London of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Partly because Zadie Smith herself was born the year that the main action of the story opens, she portrays it all with a very disturbing accuracy. We feel she's been there. We know she's one of those characters growing up in the book. She's able to describe its particular zeitgeist from first-hand experience as the British struggle to come to terms with an increasingly multicultural society in the second half of the 20th century. My poem today is by someone from a completely different time and place, who nevertheless appears, like Zadie Smith, to be celebrating diversity. It's an extract from Song of Myself by Walt Whitman, the 19th century American poet. Walt Whitman, a cosmos of Manhattan, the sun, turbulent, fleshy, sensual, eating, drinking, and breeding, no sentimentalist, no stander above men and women or apart from them, no more modest than immodest, Unscrew the locks from the door. Unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Whoever degrades another degrades me, and whatever is done or said returns at last to me. Through me, the afflatus, the inspiration, the afflatus surging and surging through me, the current and index. I speak the password primeval. I give the sign of democracy. By God, I will accept nothing which all cannot have their counterpart of on the same terms. Through me, many long dumb voices, voices of the interminable generations of prisoners and slaves, voices of the diseased and despairing and thieves and dwarves, voices of cycles of preparation and accretion, and of the threads that connect the stars, and of wombs, and of the father stuff, and of the rights of them, the others, are down upon, of the deformed, trivial, flat, foolish, despised, fog in the air, beetles rolling balls of dung. Through me, forbidden voices, voices of sex and lusts, voices veiled, and I removed the veil, voices indecent by me, clarified and transfigured. Very shocking to the American public of his day, of course. When Zadie Smith approached the literary agency of Andrew Wylie in the late 1990s with a proposal for a novel, she knew exactly what she was doing. Nicknamed the Jackal, have you heard of Wylie the Jackal? One of the most cutthroat agents in the whole of the literary world in London. Nicknamed the Jackal for his aggressive business tactics, which included poaching. This was a great cause, a scandal in the 90s or 80s in London. He was poached by Andrew Wylie from the wife of of Motion's best friend, Julian Barnes, another novelist. And since they lived opposite each other in the same road, it became rather embarrassing. Lots of articles were written on the subject. So you can see that the Jackal didn't hesitate to do a lot of unpopular things. But Wylie had erupted into the fairly genteel world of British publishing in 1996, just as Zadie Smith is about to erupt herself onto this fairly genteel platform. And this was just not very long before Smith targeted him for her own agent. So you can see from the beginning, she's a very resolute and very motivated writer who knows what she wants and goes about getting it. And of course, he knew what he was doing in accepting what he recognized immediately as a marketing department's dream. She was very young, in her early 20s. In fact, she was 19 when she first approached him. Highly intelligent, just completing a degree at Cambridge University, and in which she would get, in English literature, in which she would get a first. She was also, it quickly emerged, highly opinionated and shone at all the interviews which followed the publication of the book and preceded it. She was also extremely attractive to look at, as she clearly implied. I love the report of this covering letter she is reputed to have written to Wylie, which started, "I'm 6 foot tall, I'm 19 years old, and I don't exactly look like the back of a bus." I wish I were that clever and that daring. Mind you, I'm not 6 foot, am I? What Smith omitted to tell Wylie in her witty letter, yet would be equally, perhaps even more appealing to someone as astute as he was the fact that she is of mixed race. I think that she did this deliberately. Like Archie Jones's daughter Irie in the novel, White Teeth, Smith is the child of a white English father, Archie Jones, well, I don't think he was called Archie in real life, and a black West Indian mother. She was, as one journalist euphemistically put it, ethnically interesting, and had what another writer termed the perfect demographic for the emerging 21st century, a reflection of Britain's rapidly changing society, a symbol of the new Britain's self-definitions. Cometh the time, cometh the man or the woman. While not completely dictating the terms of Smith's first novel's reception, her biographical profile certainly increased her exposure. It would be unfair, however, to suggest that Wiley accepted a completely unseen novel on the strength of her being 6 foot and rather attractive. By the time he accepted her, he'd seen 3 chapters and a synopsis, and he recognized it as brilliant in parts, easily accessible, especially to the younger generation, extremely funny, I hope you'll agree with me, but also dealing with serious current social issues. White Teeth was one of the first, if not the first book, to deal with more than 2 races intermingling. There'd been Salman Rushdie, of course, Midnight's Children and all those books, and Hanif Qureshi, but they had only really dealt with the white community and the Indian community. Here was Smith introducing a novel in which you have an equal proportion of Indian and African and white, and a few others thrown in, as you'll hear. A positive recommendation by Salman Rushdie on the cover didn't harm the book. And I was looking for this so that I could show it to you up here, but I couldn't. I couldn't find the first hardcover copy. If you've got the first hardcover copy with that commendation on the cover, you're in possession of something rather valuable. The timing too, January 2000. The first month, you can recognize a Jackal agent here, can't you? The first year of the new millennium, the first month of the first year of the new millennium, also drew attention to it. And White Teeth became one of the most talked about fictional debuts of the time and went on to win a string of prizes. And just as Smith's own ethnicity gives her a head start in a novel about multiculturalism, so too does her place of birth and upbringing. And this is a place called Wilston Green in the north of London. Now, I don't know how much of this you're going to be able to see, but it was done by a very devoted student of mine who is also a geographer. And what she discovered, and I think I've said this to several of you, is that the demographic of Wilston Green is very similar to the demographic of Cape Town. These figures may be out of date now for Cape Town, but certainly at the time there was a very strong similarity between the proportion. 32% Indian, though only 1% Bangladeshi, like the Iqbal family, 7% Pakistani, and 12% other Asian, which I find rather intriguing. 37% either black Caribbean, black African, or black other. These are English terms, so if I offend, I'm not intending to. And only 9% simply other. That's me. I'm other, because of course other means the white population, presumably white British. A census in 2011 found that 149 different languages were spoken in the borough of Brent, in which Wilston Green and its neighbourhoods of Kilburn and Cricklewood were contained. That's the white with the red spot in it there. Zadie Smith thinks it important that we should be aware of the extent of multiculturalism just over halfway through the novel. She allows her omniscient narrator. She has different voices speaking to you. Sometimes it's Irie, sometimes it's Iqbal, sometimes it's Archie. We go into different heads. But there is also the omniscient narrator, and she can't resist a little homily on the subject, softened with a little bit of humour. This, she writes in White Teeth, has been the century of strangers, brown, yellow, and white. This has been the century of the great immigrant experiment. It is only, and this is extract 2, it is only this late in the day that you can walk into a playground and find Isaac Leung by the fish pond Danny Rahman in the football cage, Quang O'Rourke bouncing a basketball, and Irie Jones humming a tune. Children with first and last names on a direct collision course. Names that secrete within them mass exodus, cramped boats and planes, cold arrivals, medical checks. It is only this late in the day, and possibly only in Wilston, that you can find best friends Sita and Sharon constantly mistaken for each other, because Sita is white, her mother liked the name, and Sharon is Pakistani. Her mother thought it best, less trouble. Yet despite all the mixing up, despite the fact that we have finally slipped into each other's lives with reasonable comfort, like a man returning to his lover's bed after a midnight walk, despite all this, it is still hard to admit that there is no one more English than the Indian, no one more Indian than the English. There are still young white men who are angry about that and who will roll out at closing time, roll out of the pub at closing time, of course, into the poorly lit streets with a kitchen knife wrapped in a tight fist. And you notice the way in which she softened things through humour, but then she goes back to being serious about the real problem that confronts British society. The First World War had turned Wilston from what had been a predominantly middle-class suburb to a working-class part of London as unemployment rose. And it has remained largely working-class, although nowadays I think houses in Wilston, possibly because Zadie Smith herself came from there and returned there, although she lives half of the year in New York, houses have risen in price in Wilston. But at that time, they were very cheap indeed. By 1933, a small Irish community had formed in Wilston, which grew rapidly in the Second World War. And you notice the pub, I think it's wonderfully mixed. The pub where Archie and Samad meet is called O'Connell's Pool Hall, run by a Muslim called Mickey Abdullah. She has great fun, of course, with the names. And a small Jewish community of refugees from Europe also formed during the war, with 3.5% of the population by 1951, born in Germany, Poland, Russia, or Austria. Though apparently, it's very funny because the most English family in the book, the one that represents itself as the most English, are the Chalfens, who are actually of Polish, Jewish origin, very recently as well. Then after, what she's saying, of course, is we're none of us ethnically in any way just English. Then after 1948, and some of you will know more about this than I do, fascinating material, when the SS Empire Windrush docked at Tilbury Dock in London, depositing 500 settlers from Jamaica on English soil, many of them ex-servicemen and women who had fought for Britain during the Second World War and who were welcomed to Britain. It was Wilston who received the largest influx of migrants. Then there were also a substantial number of migrants entering from the English-Indian subcontinent in the years following. And in 1963, the first Pekingese restaurant opened. So you can see, ethnically, it was always on the move. The Chinese, I have to report, are virtually absent from White Teeth. Perhaps she didn't have any Chinese friends. There was a further decline in Wilston in social terms during the 1970s and 80s, when much of White Teeth takes place. So she's reflecting a very accurate social movement in the book. The novel opens, for example, in adjoining Cricklewood Broadway, not exactly the most inviting of places as Zadie Smith sees it. So this is where the novel opens. And it looks quite comforting with that red bus. I don't think my student got you the right picture, but she has got a halal butcher in it. So those of you who read the novel will realize that it's a very accurate picture. The peculiar second marriage of Archie Jones is how the book starts. Early, and this is, have I got the extract? Yes. Early in the morning, late in the century, Cricklewood, Broadway. At 6:27 hours on the 1st of January, 1975, Alfred Archibald Jones was dressed in corduroy and sat in a fume-filled Cavalier Musketeer estate, face down on the steering wheel, hoping the judgment would not be too heavy on him. He lay forward in a prostrate cross, jaw slack, arms splayed either side like some fallen angel. Scrunched up in each fist he held his army service medals, left, as though that matters, and his marriage license, right, for he had decided to take his mistakes with him. A little green light flashed in his eyes, signalling a right turn he had resolved never to make. He was resigned to it. He was prepared for it. He had flipped a coin and stood staunchly by its conclusion. This was a decided upon suicide. In fact, it was a New Year's resolution. But even as his breathing, it's all right, he lives, so you can all laugh if you want to. But even as his breathing became spasmodic and his lights dimmed, Archie was aware that Cricklewood Broadway would seem a strange choice. Strange to the first person to notice his slumped figure through the windscreen, strange to the policeman who would file the report, to the local journalist called upon to write 50 words, to the next of kin who would read them. Squeezed between an almighty concrete cinema complex at one end and a giant intersection at the other, Cricklewood was no kind of a place. It was not a place a man came to die. It was a place a man came in order to go other places via the A41. But Archie Jones didn't want to die in some pleasant, distant woodland or on a cliff edge fringed with delicate heather. The way Archie saw it, country people should die in the country and city people should die in the city. Only proper. This is one of his favourite phrases, besides always flipping a coin to decide. Only proper. In death as he was in life and all that, it made sense that Archibald should die on this nasty urban street where he had ended up, living alone at the age of 47 in a one-bedroom flat above a deserted chip shop. He wasn't the type to make elaborate plans, suicide notes and funeral instructions. He wasn't the type for anything fancy. All he asked for was a bit of silence, a bit of shush so he could concentrate. He wanted it to be perfectly quiet and still, like the inside of an empty confessional box or the moment in the brain between thought and speech. He wanted to do it before the shops opened. Well, poor Archie has just had his Italian wife, Ophelia, walk out on him. She couldn't stand his dullness, it's reported. She left him with the Hoover. That housewife's manacle, I think he bought it her as a wedding present, I'm not sure. He has resolved to put it to more manly use by attaching its tube to the exhaust pipe of his car, of his unlovely car, and poison himself. But luck was with him that morning. A local halal butcher, Mr. Hussein Ishmael, outside whose premises the Cavalier is parked, discovers what Archie is doing. I am gassing myself, leave me alone. And orders him to move on. No one gasses himself on my property, we are not licensed. Archie, who makes the important decision in his life by the flip of a coin, takes it as a sign. He does not merely move on, but lives on and loves on. He drops in, and this is one of the funniest scenes in the book, he drops in on a New Year's party. This is a kind of commune, and they're all free love and all the rest of it. And he finds a new mate, Clara, who, like Zadie Smith, is 6 foot tall and very attractive. She's from Jamaica via Lambeth, South London, 2 faraway places. She does not find Archie dull. A peculiar marriage ensues. New year, new life. The main action continues to take place in Cricklewood, Wilston, and Kilburn, a place where, as Smith's caustic narrator in the novel explains, with what you will already have recognised as considerable humour, I hope, any street, without exception, the narrator tells us, will include one defunct sandwich bar, still advertising breakfast, one locksmith uninterested in marketing frills, keys cut here, and one permanently shut unisex hair salon, the proud bearer of some unspeakable pun, uppercuts, or fringe benefits, or hair today, gone tomorrow. The detail, of course, is lovely, isn't it? I say the main action since, as one critic rather unkindly put it, the plot skitters maddeningly, both from place to place and from one period of history to another. Though it starts, as we've seen, in 1975, it does then go back 30 years to when Archie Jones, and Samad, who will be the other main protagonist, meet in the Second World War. He will eventually become his best friend, Samad, and they will both eventually live in Wilston, and they will have children who will ultimately become good friends. More than that at the end of the novel. More later. The time sequence appears to be deliberately jumbled, as the section titles show, as Zadie Smith then leaps even more confusingly to Samad 1934 and 1857, followed by Irie, she's the daughter of Archie, 1990, 1907. So why is it a final section entitled Magad, Milad, and Marcus, 1922-1999. Now, you don't know where you are, do you? I mean, I thought we were going to be in 1975, but it's very hard to follow this. But you may remember that Marcus Chalfen is the man who represents the Jewish community, a clever Jewish scientist. Smith is always, in the words of the critic Claire Squire, reversing, restarting, restating, revising the structure of the novel, mimicking the waywardness of the narrative. But back for a moment to that second period of the book, 1945, when Archie and Samad first met as part of a tank crew inching through Europe in the final days of World War II. And again, this gives a lot of life to that period, because instead of it being exciting action, as one would expect, looking at history, as the historian might tell you, it's dull. They're in a tank, they don't know where they're going, they don't know what they're doing, and they haven't succeeded. So this is real, this is the way in which she portrays it. And neither of them have seen much action, and they continue to miss out on the action to the end. Archie is what Anthony Quinn in the New York Times calls a sad sack, a dull but decent fellow. And I love this detail that Zadie Smith gives us to illustrate how very dull he is, who tied for 13th place in a bicycle race in the Olympics in 1948. Even his attempt at suicide is a failure. Samad, in spite of looking like Omar Sharif, becomes a downtrodden waiter in a West End curry house when he comes to London to find work, and is obsessed by the history of his great-grandfather Mangal Pandey, who allegedly fired the first shot of the Indian Mutiny and missed. And Samad is always boring his family, his friends, with all the details of this wonderful ancestor of his. Once back in 1975, Archie quickly marries again to the 6-foot Jamaican teenager who I mentioned he meets at a party. Unlike Smith, however, Clara Bowden has not got her own teeth. She's had most of her top teeth knocked out in a moped accident with her ex-boyfriend. An event, now you may feel this is completely irrelevant, but actually, when you think of the titles, the novel, White Teeth, it's an event to which she gives brilliant elaboration in a series of linked references and metaphors to teeth. What on earth have teeth got to do with the subject of this novel? Teeth in the racial question is, of course, an interesting thought. The fact that a dentist is about all Irie Jones can aspire to, she's not allowed to go any further up the social scale, is perhaps one of those things. The teeth of the novel's title becomes the prevailing metaphor for the book's historical method, with 3 chapters of what are called root canals. The root canal of Samad Iqbal, the root canal of Archie Jones, the root canal, etc., etc. Giving the back histories of Archie, Samad, and Hortense Bowden, Clara's mother. Irie's decision to become a dentist, a blackly comic interlude in which the 3 children of Archie, and I've told you who they are, Irie, Magid, and Millat, take food. And this is a very sad and yet at the same time wildly funny scene. They have been sent by their enlightened school, which celebrates every religious festival going, to take food for Harvest Festival to the old age pensioner who doesn't want it, doesn't know who they are, but invites them in anyway. So they give him the food, and he's reminiscing, this old age pensioner, blithely ignoring their colour, about the white teeth of the black natives he fought against in Africa, as he contemplates their harvest offerings. Apples? Oh dear me, no. Chickpeas? No, no, no. Potato chips? I simply cannot eat anything unless it has been pulverized beforehand. You see, my own fault, years and years of neglect. Clean teeth, never a priority in the army. That's how it's introduced. Having lectured them on the importance of brushing one's teeth, Mr. Hamilton, the old age pensioner, then adds, but like all things, the business has 2 sides. Clean white teeth are not always wise now, are they? Admitting, though with no apparent regret, that it was the whiteness of the black men's teeth in the Congo that enabled him to identify and kill them. So there's a lot of, well, dare I say, black humour in this book. It's very dark humour anyway. It's a chilling passage which reduces Irie, at least, to tears. Passages like this, though entertaining on the surface, as I've suggested, have a very serious purpose. And they show how carefully Zadie Smith, even Zadie Smith of mixed race, has to tread in discussing topics like race. They also show how tempting it is for someone as clever as she is to link everything together in a way which can seem almost too neat at times, especially those chapters called Root Canals. I think it's a bit clever, isn't it? She's so clever. This is seen most clearly in the last quarter of the book, where she appears to force the many strands of the plot together. And if there's one criticism, and it did come 25th in a most recent 100 best books of the last 3 centuries in England, so, it's got a good following, this book. And if you want to be really well read, you'll have to read it. But it was, it is very much a book which falters as it ends, because she's so clever, because she's trying to tie everything up and make them all fit in together. At the end, Marcus Chalfon, the rather obnoxious Jewish scientist, is giving a lecture on what he calls future mouse. It's a mouse on which he's doing genetic experiments, and of course all sorts of themes around that too. At the same time, you see, there are twins, so that helps. You know about Mengele's experiments always preferring to experiment on twins because of the checks and the balances that could be exercised. So beware if you're a twin. Up to that point, the novel's sheer inventiveness and exuberance carries us along, but at that last meeting, everybody comes together. All the characters in the book come together. All the themes in the book come together. And one wishes she had had the nerve to leave it a little earlier. The next stage of the book, with Irie, Magad, and Millet's education assured, and it provides us with Samad's guilt-ridden affair with his twin's teacher, Poppy Burt Jones, one of the most entertaining characters in the book. His further bargain with his guilt-ridden Muslim conscience over his excessive masturbation after it finishes, and his decision to send one of his twins, he can't afford the fare for both, back to Bangladesh, because Samad believes that British society is totally corrupt, and that if this child could go back to Bangladesh, he would have his innocence preserved. In the end, of course, it makes no difference at all. There are, therefore, rather a lot of coincidences. When Magad has his nose broken in a tornado in Bangladesh, Millat, his twin, experiences the same misfortune by falling against the kitchen sink in England. Well, stretching credibility a bit far, perhaps. And Magad's miraculous escape in the same tornado that breaks his nose is paralleled by Millat's equally miraculous escape from HIV in England. It's just too neat at this point. But we have become fairly used, I think, to what is now called magical realism, and therefore ready to accept such coincidences through works like Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera, one of my favourite books, Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children, Angela Carter's Nights at the Circus. All these books have taken us into a world in which magical realism operates rather than logical events. It's only towards the end that we begin to miss what Aristotle advised. A convincing impossibility, he says, is preferable to an unconvincing possibility. Interesting, isn't it, that? Because I think he's right. And that Smith then offers she offers to sort of let us take a way out of that by pretending it's magical realism, I think. But she did need perhaps a slightly firmer editorial hand at the end. James Wood, that brilliant critic I mentioned to you, while hugely admiring of Smith's powers of invention, argues that there is too much of it. His own term for this is his own term for the unlikely ending in which, among many other extraordinary happenings, Irie Jones has sex first with one twin and then quickly runs round the corner and has sex with the other twin. I don't know why, but she does this, and of course this then means that she doesn't know whose baby she's having when she subsequently has her baby. He says it's not magical realism, this, but rather hysterical realism, which I rather like. But though life is never experienced with such fervid intensity of connectedness, there is clearly a lesson behind these frantic scenes, something about our natural multiracial multiplicity, perhaps. I think really that despite its frantic ending and somewhat apologetic coda when we end up in 1999 in Jamaica, White Teeth is an impressive debut, and if not quite perfect, it is almost certainly because Smith sets her sights too high. She's trying, I think, to discuss too many of these very important questions. She's not content with a kind of comic Bridget Jones type novel, which might be expected from a clever young female writer determined to make her name at the end of the 20th century. She reaches beyond the stock-in-trade themes of boyfriends and weight problems, though both are dealt with very entertainingly in White Teeth, to more ambitious treatments of wider issues, which in turn demands that she explores a wider range of genre than chick lit. Nevertheless, White Teeth is, among other things, a highly accomplished comic novel. So it does have Bridget Jones' side. It's also a relatively straightforward, realistic novel, particularly when Smith describes the backstories of her main characters. Samad's struggles to find work as a waiter, his treatment by the customers in the Indian restaurant who can't even pronounce the names of the dishes that they're ordering, are very painful as well as quite comic. It's also a family saga. We have many generations of the Jones family, Clara Bowden's mother, and then Clara herself, and then her daughter Irie, linked in with the Archie Jones story. And then that magical realism to which I've referred, and what Smith calls the meta-narrative, where the narrator comments on what's happening. So you get a lot of levels in this novel. But however confusing this veering between genres may be at times, it does enable her to deal with a wide variety of themes in a variety of appropriate ways. The book opens dramatically, as we've seen, with the subject of fate or destiny, when Archie Jones is saved by pure luck as he groggily watches the pigeons depositing their droppings on the halal butcher's animal carcasses. These are the carcasses. And perhaps I will read you this. The unlucky, this is extract 5 on your sheet. These pigeons had an instinct for the unlucky. So if a pigeon drops anything on your head, that means you're the unlucky. And so they passed Archie by, for though he did not know it, and despite the Hoover tube that lay on the passenger seat pumping from the exhaust pipe into his lungs, luck was with him that morning. The thinnest covering of luck was on him, like a fresh dew. Whilst he slipped in and out of consciousness, the position of the planets, the music of the spheres, the flap of a tiger moth's diaphanous wings in Central Africa, and a whole bunch of other stuff that makes shit happen, had decided it was second chance time for Archie. Somewhere, somehow, by somebody, it had been decided that he would live. And it's interesting, isn't it, because I often feel that, between disaster and success, there lies that very, very slight moment, the lucky and the unlucky. Archie continues to be blessed by luck throughout, escaping death again at the end when Millat, one of the twins, fires his gun at what he thinks is this wicked scientist experimenting on animals, and hits Archie Jones instead. But he only hits him in the thigh, in a wonderful coincidence that reflects an incident at the beginning of the book. Even Archie's way of making decisions by the flip of a coin is, of course, strengthens the idea of it being fate or destiny that decide things, rather than individual choice. And when Magid, who's come back from Bangladesh, enters O'Connell's pool house after his return from Bangladesh, he asks the assembled company whether he should meet with his twin Millat, with whom he's fallen out. Archie, ever non-committal, will not venture an answer despite Samad's frustrated request to him. Make a decision, Archibald, for once in your pathetic little life, make a decision. So he makes his decision the way he habitually does, by flipping a coin. The coin, though, arcs through the air into the slot of the pinball machine, setting off its mechanism, leading Archie not to answer Magid's question, but to ask, what are the chances of that, eh? The central theme of the novel, however, has to be multiculturalism. A multiculturalism that includes both religion and race, and that dominates the plot. The white British Archie is saved by Mo Hussein Ismail, a Muslim who employs a Hindu to scare off the pigeons daily. And not only is Archie's best friend Samid Iqbal, the Bangladeshi, but his first wife was an Italian, presumably Catholic. So you get a wonderful mixture. I mean, it would be hard to meet such a social and racial and religious mix. And his second wife is a Jamaican whose mother is a devout Jehovah's Witness, so that comes in too. It's great fun. He and Samad meet regularly at O'Connell's pool house, founded by an Irishman, but now run, as I think I told you, by the Iraqi Muslim Abdullah Nikki. He's second generation, so all the things, I said Mickey Abdullah, didn't I? But actually, the Muslim name comes first, and then they always put Mickey on the end just to distinguish them. It also emerges that Clara has been educated at an Irish Catholic school, so there's plenty going on. And later, when Clara and Samad's Bengali wife, Alsana, together with her lesbian niece of shame, as she calls her, she's one of the most entertaining characters in the book, actually, meet in the local park for lunch, the self-appointed park keeper, his paid job's long gone, but he keeps a watch on the ladies in the park to keep them safe. He has a name and a mission that hint at a Polish-Jewish background and an escape from the Holocaust. His name is Sol Josefovich. So one does rather wonder about all of that, and it's just skated over very lightly. The Chalfons, that Jewish family, a highly respectable middle-class English family in which the father Marcus is a university professor and the mother Joyce a writer of gardening books, seem more quintessentially English than the English, but turn out to be, as I told you, of Jewish, Polish, Catholic background, not very far back. And Joyce, who is one of the smuggest characters you will ever come across in fiction, and a very good value, describes their children in her usual smug way as a cross-pollination between a lapsed Catholic horticulturalist feminist and an intellectual Jew. Hope you feel sorry for the children. This extreme hybridization is summed up in Millat's Crew. Now, Millat is a wide boy. Millet is somebody who has been disenfranchised, he feels, who has been shown that he is the scum of the earth, and Millat is angry. And Millet is drawn to a crew, a breed known otherwise as Ragastani, as they set out in 1989 to make trouble in Bradford, where we know that Salman Rushdie's books are being burned. The narrator tells us it was a new breed. I just like her style so much. I think she gets so much of that street feeling into this. It was a new breed just recently joining the ranks of the other street crews. Becks, B-boys, indie kids, wide boys, ravers, rude boys, acid heads, Sharons, Tracys, Kevs, nation brothers, raggers and puckies, manifesting itself as a kind of cultural mongrel of the last three categories. Ragastanis spoke a strange mix of Jamaican patois, Bengali, Gujarati, and English. Their ethos, their manifesto, if it could be called that, was an equally hybrid thing. Allah featured, but more as a collective big brother than a supreme being. A hard-as-fuck geezer who would fight in their corner if necessary. Kung Fu and the works of Bruce Lee were also central to the philosophy. Added to this was a smattering of black power as embodied by the album Fear of a Black Planet, Public Enemy. But mainly their mission, this crew's mission, was to put the invincible back in Indian, the badass back in Bengali, the P-funk back in Pakistani. People had fucked with Rajik back in the days when he was into chess and wore a V-neck pullover. People had fucked with Ranil when he sat at the back of the class and carefully copied all teachers' comments into his book. People had fucked with Dipesh and Hifan when they wore traditional dress in the playground. People had even fucked with Millat with his tight jeans and his white rock. But no one fucked with any of them anymore because they looked like trouble. They looked like trouble in stereo. There is racism of the kind encountered in the white inhabitants of Wilston when they mutter to themselves on the bus. Have you heard this kind of comment? Well, I've heard it in England. The children rush off the bus very late, noisily, all these mixed-race children, and the white residents cluck and say that they should go back to their own country. Or, more shockingly, when Archie is not invited to the firm's next party after they realise that he has married a Jamaican. This is actually, it's very interesting to me because now in 2015 you don't encounter this in quite such an obvious form. You encounter it, of course, but not in such an obvious form. But this passage particularly reminded me how even the nicest people had a kind of tremendous inbuilt racism in them. Archie has a friend at the office, and we're made acutely aware of this when his colleague Maureen reflects on, quote, this strange way he had about him, always talking to Pakistanis and Caribbeans like he didn't even notice. And now he'd gone and married one and hadn't even thought it worth mentioning what colour she was, until the office dinner, when she turned up black as anything, and Maureen almost choked on her prawn cocktail. And it's very interesting, isn't it? Because it's funny, but it's also deadly serious, isn't it? I mean, what extraordinary prejudice. Unthinking, really. And linked to all these themes is the question of identity and roots. At the end of the passage, we read on the narrator's thoughts on multiculturalism. Smith adds, but it makes an immigrant laugh to hear the fears of the nationalist, scared of infection, penetration, miscegenation, when this is small fry, peanuts, compared to what the immigrant fears, dissolution, disappearance. Very shrewd comment, I think. I mean, you know, Clara's mother, Hortense, though she has white blood in her, when she learns of Clara's marriage to a white man, terminates her relationship with her. Hortense, this is the narrator, Hortense hadn't put all that effort into marrying black, into dragging her genes back from the brink for nothing. She wants to stay black. She doesn't want her daughter marrying a white man. As Clara's daughter Irie's self-loathing over her body shape shows, she too is very conscious of all these things. Irie Jones was big. This is what the narrator tells us. The European proportions of her mother Clara's figure had skipped a generation. She was landed instead with Hortense's substantial Jamaican frame, loaded with pineapples, mangoes, and guavas. The girl had weight. Big tits, big butt, big thighs, big teeth. And it's, again, you see, Irie is deeply unhappy, and not Irie, Clara, but yes, it's Irie, isn't it? But we do understand, and yet we laugh at the same time. She's caught, Irie, between her part Caribbean roots and the white girls around her. Her hair, in particular, causes her great grief, and her visit to Piquet's afro hair to have it straightened, though hilariously funny at times, also verges on near tragedy. This is extract 7. The cryptically named Piquet afro hair, design and management, sat between Fairweather Funeral Parlour and Rapshan Dentists. The convenient proximity, meaning it was not at all uncommon for a cadaver of African origin to pass through all three establishments on his or her final journey to an open casket. So when you phoned for a hair appointment and Andrea or Denise or Jackie told you 3:30 Jamaican time, naturally it meant come late. But there was also a chance it meant that some stone-cold, church-going lady was determined to go to her grave with long, fake nails and a weave-on. Strange as it sounds, there are plenty of people who refuse to meet the Lord with an afro. Irie, ignorant of all this, turned up for her appointment 3:30 on the dot, intent upon transformation, intent upon fighting her genes, a headscarf disguising the bird's nest of her hair, her right hand carefully placed upon her stomach. "You want something, Pickney?" one of the girls asks her. Straight hair. Straight, long, black, sleek, flickable, tossable, shakeable, touchable, finger-throughable, wind-blowable hair with a fringe. 3:30 was all Irie managed to convey of this with Andrea. Well, it is, again, it's one of these sad scenes which at the same time contains something very serious for this poor girl who is caught between identities. There's also the related theme of East versus West, which is summed up most in Samad and his desire to send his son back to the East to recover this sort of primal innocence that he thinks he's going to find there. Doesn't at all, of course. And his disapproval of the younger generation of Bengalis, Indians who have come to England. There are more general themes, marriage, as you've seen with Maarchi and Iqbal, and also friendships between the wives, smoking, there's a lot about drugs and cigarettes in there, lesbianism, touched on hilariously in the scene with Alsana's niece of shame, who isn't at all ashamed, I might say, and the occasional look at class issues, as the lower middle class Irie reflects on her relationship with those very superior upper middle class Chalfons, whose frankness, particularly with regard to sex, both shocks and attracts her. She'd never been so close to this strange and beautiful thing, the middle class, and experienced the kind of embarrassment that is actually intrigue, fascination. It was both strange and wondrous. She felt like the prude who walks through a nudist beach examining the sand. But the two other main topics of debate in White Teeth, for me at least, are the position of women, and there's a tremendous amount of independence in the Indian woman, whom you would not expect to be independent, and the role of science. And one of the many ironies of the book, in a book full of them, is that it is not Joyce Chalfon, the self-advertised, liberated feminist with an enlightened husband, who emerges as the strongest of the many memorable female characters in this book, but the Bengali Muslim wife, Alsana, who comes from a background not known for its enlightened attitude towards women. Neither her arranged marriage nor the big age difference between herself and Samad stops her speaking her mind in the most forthright manner. She is certainly not the submissive wife that either Samad or the patronizing liberal feminists, with the piteous, saddened smiles, Smith writes, they reserve for the subjugated Muslim women. So neither of them expect her to be a feminist and to be strong as she is. Alsana may initially be a breath of fresh air to the newly married, rejuvenated Samad, but her shrewd eyes suggest that she is unlikely to conform to expectations, and she doesn't. And she fights physically fights, and she has the advantage of weight by the time they have their best fights, and the twins stand by and act as referees. Clara, too, in a less dramatic way, turns out to be a feminist. The end of the novel is dominated by the theme of science and that theme of twins. It's an interesting idea that the mouse could transform things, and it's linked into the twins and how they're and the connection between the society in which you grow up, your racial background, and by sending one twin to, it's like a sort of control experiment, isn't it? If you send one twin away to India, or Bengal, and the other twin stays in England, what's going to happen? In fact, they end up pretty much the same. And there's a lovely comment when Marcus Chalfont, the geneticist, meets one of the twins at the airport coming back, and he says he had brought, how's he going to know this boy? He hasn't seen him for 10 years, and he says he had brought no piece of white cardboard, either some large banner with a name upon it like the rest of his fellow waiters. How would they know each other? Then he remembered he was meeting a twin, and remembering that made him laugh out loud. It was incredible and sublime, even to him, that a boy could walk out of that tunnel with precisely the same genetic code as a boy he already knew, and yet in every conceivable way be different. So there's a great deal of interest in the scientific. Then, just to conclude, she is dealing with serious issues, but on the whole with great humour, so that she rarely seems to be lecturing or telling us what to think. It all makes for an exhilarating read. As John Sutherland, who's a well-known English critic, writes, the sheer zest of her writing is like breathing oxygen off the page. It is wonderfully written at times. Her style also reveals an impressive ear for linguistic differences. So you get Cockney, you get Pakistani, you get definitely the Jamaican lingo, which she does beautifully. I wouldn't dare to do it because, of course, I would be accused of being condescending, but she's able to do that. And it's very entertaining, but I think what we know in the end is that this is a serious book about serious issues. It doesn't turn its characters into caricatures. There are moments when they all realise what the odds are against them. Irie with her Jamaican body and her kinky curly hair that she doesn't want. Even Millat, the tough Millat, who knows that when people look at him in the street, they will just see someone of colour, that they will just assume that he can't have the job that he's gone to apply for. It's a book which deals convincingly with very real problems while retaining its basically optimistic outlook on life. Its very crowdedness, its tangle of competing voices and viewpoints, skillfully reflecting a society struggling towards tolerance, struggling very hard, but not terribly effectively at times, even perhaps struggling towards fellowship, and at a time when multiculturalism will no longer, and towards a time when it won't be a problem anymore. I think she deals with it from a position of strength. Anyway, you've just better read the book, haven't you? Thank you.